Dr. Verschuuren, welcome back to my podcast, Dig Life Deep. I always enjoy talking to you. The last time I had you on my show, we talked about your last book, A Catholic Scientist Proves How God Exists. And I feel this latest book, Faith That Makes You Think, is something in the same mold, although it has a much different twist. It goes into more depth about a lot of topics, and it's a fresh and refreshing read. Um, it occurred to me that maybe the reason you wrote this book is that you'd sort of looked all around you in the United States and the Western world, and perhaps you kind of were looking at the state of the Catholic Church in the world today, and it's, by all accounts, you could argue it's in decline, it's in collapse, and would that be one of the motivations for you writing this book? Some kind of an imminent collapse in the Catholic Church in the Western world?
Yes, I think you said that right, John. I try to make it a wide book for people who were Catholic and have fallen away, or people who have been affected by a very strong group of atheists that we have especially in the United States, but also in England, who write books and are very popular. So in order to fight that, we have to show that faith is not irrational. It is something that you can talk about, that you can prove. I even go that far, that you can prove that there is a God. And we have to show that to people. For many people think that as a Catholic, you just believe and you don't think. And atheists say, why don't you just think and stop believing? I think it's together. Those two are together. That's why we have in the Catholic Church very strong people who say it's faith and reason. That was already said in the scholastic time. Pope Leo XIII wrote an encyclical about it. John Paul II wrote an encyclical about it, faith and reason. I always like to quote St. Augustine, who could not have said it more plainly. Believers are also thinkers. In believing, they think, and in thinking, they believe. And that harmony I would like to show in my book, and basically against atheism.
Yeah, well, just quickly back on that, your motivations for writing the book. How would you measure, if this is the right word, the collapse in faith within the Catholic Church in the Western world? Do you measure it by the number of people that go to church on Sunday, or at the pews, or is there some other way to rationalize it, or is it what you just see in your daily encounters, what you're reading in the media, and just a general sense of despair and nihilism?
Yeah, I think it's the latter part. I don't think it's easy to measure things like that. And besides, people say something like in polls, they say not always what they think, they just say what others want to hear. So I think it's important to realize that there is some problem with the faith of Catholics. That's a general feeling I have. And when I was teaching, and now I'm semi-retired, but when I was teaching, I could feel and hear among students all these critical remarks. Sometimes that was to tease me, I'm sure, but it was also a matter of fact that they say in faith, can you really think about things there? And I would say, oh yes, definitely, definitely. And unfortunately, atheists have taken over. And they have had quite an impact on people. So I started the book with a chapter on atheism. I distinguished 5, 6 kinds of atheism. And I think I showed for each kind that it doesn't make much sense to hold that. But unfortunately, those atheists are very, may I say, very determined. St. Thomas Aquinas said it very well. He said, whereas unbelief is in the intellect, the cause of unbelief is in the will. That's a deep one. Whereas unbelief is in the intellect, the cause of unbelief is in the will. In other words, I can show with all kind of arguments that you should believe, but if you are not willing to do that, then we have really a problem. And I think St. Thomas Aquinas was very right on that. Most atheists are not willing to believe there is a God. So you can come up with the best proofs of God's existence. You can come up with science that points to God in many different ways, but they don't want to see it. They don't want to accept it. And I cannot change the will. Of course, deep down, that is part of the original sin. You know, the original sin says we have been, from the beginning of humanity, we have been fooled by Satan, or whatever you want to call it, the snake or the serpent in paradise. And we have lost the common sense, not only, but also the will. We have a destructive will. And that is very hard to change. So I can reason whatever I want. I can use arguments whatever I want. I cannot change the will of people. I can only hope that they say, this guy, Gerard Verschuuren, has a good will and is willing to help us and is willing to show us. But are they going to say yes? I hope so, and I pray so.
I'm looking at all the books in the background. Are these all books you've written?
Yes.
Wow, a great library. I recommend people to pick them up. You said a lot there, and I'm just going to pick some of it apart. Because you get into it in the book about non-believers, atheists, agnostics, and so on. And it's almost like they approach believers, in a sense, with verbal violence, if not physical violence. So I'm sort of wondering where all of that comes from, because believers and people of faith don't reciprocate in that sense, unless, of course, they get hot under the collar. No pun intended. But, you know, you can address that in a moment. But, you know, the other thing that occurs to me is that I know personally many people who have no faith. They're agnostics, atheists, non-believers, don't believe in God, or maybe they're searching for God, which really is a separate discussion. And many of them are kind, they're charitable, seemingly happy on the surface, seemingly purpose-driven, and they are dedicated family people in many ways, dedicated community people other times. So what do you say to them? Why do they need a faith in God? Is it necessary for them to take the next step, to have this faith in God?
Yeah, I think if you don't have belief or faith in God, there are a lot of things that don't make sense in life anymore. And I can go on very technical issues. And I always say, if you don't see that this world is intelligible, and of course it's intelligible, otherwise we have to stop talking about this world.
Mm-hmm.
But then there must be an intelligent creator. Isn't that true? How could nature be intelligible if it were not created by an intelligent creator? I could even go further. How could there be order in this world? We know that this world is orderly. We see the sun come up in the morning. Let's hope it comes up. And tomorrow morning, we expect that the sun will come up unless there are clouds. So there is order. How could there be order in the world if there were no order or creator? And so I could go on and on and on. But what is even more important, that if we cannot assume that there is a God, then everything is allowed. For God is the maker of moral laws. He gave us the Ten Commandments, and he gave us other instructions in the Bible. And if we don't follow those instructions, if you are an atheist, you say, so what? So that means that if there is no God, all things are permissible. The famous Russian writer Dostoevsky put it that way. Without God, all things are permissible. So without God, eternal beyond, there wouldn't be eternal moral laws, and we would be mere animals. If there is no God, then we are just animals without a mind or a soul. And if you don't have a mind or a soul, you have become an animal. We are already animals, I know, but we are more than animals. We have a soul, we have a mind, and we have a will. Animals lack all of that. So scientists tell us that morality is a matter of law and order, is a matter of legislation, is a matter of our genes. It's a product of natural selection. And you could go on and on and on. If there is no God, there is really no morality. That doesn't mean that non-believers can be morally right, but they don't know why they are right or why they should be right. Let's put it that way. So they go by what they have heard from their parents, what they hear in school, hopefully. And so they live their life as if they are pagans, heathens. Pope Benedict XVI used to say that they have become heathens. Can they be morally right? Of course they can, but they have no idea anymore. I always mention the famous, awful philosopher Nietzsche. Nietzsche used to say, we live now in caves. And we have lost everything, but there are still signs on the wall that remind us of the past. So we are living by the past, according to Nietzsche, because we have no faith anymore. That's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. To give a counter example, the famous French philosopher that, he was an atheist, Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, he did the opposite. He said there cannot be any eternal laws if there is no creator. And he believed there was no creator, so he said there cannot be eternal laws. Well, the end of the story is that at the end of his life, he had a big revelation, a conversion, or whatever you call it. So when they talk about Jean-Paul Sartre, all those atheists, they forget that last part. They probably think he got senile or whatever, but he was not senile at all. So he just said, I have to change what I always said as a very atheistic philosopher. So he came back. He said, there must be a God, otherwise we cannot have moral laws. And he changed his attitude. Unfortunately, he died very soon after that. But until the very end, he was very well aware of his surroundings. He was not senile at all. Okay, that's the counter story.
Yeah, so with God we can have moral laws and moral restraint, and I suppose there's less of that in the world today. There's less restraint, so we see the tendency to do very diabolical things on this planet, wars and rumors of wars. You must get asked this quite often, and if you're not, I'm going to ask you, why is it that our God doesn't make his presence more visibly transparent in our daily lives with more striking signs of his presence, so that when the non-believers and the believers alike sort of move about during the day, they can say, oh gosh, yeah, God gave me a sign today and I saw him walking across the street. Wonderful. I just got to get my act together. So people struggle with that, you know?
Yes, I can understand that. It's the Old and New Testament is full of that people want to see signs. Why doesn't God show more signs? Because he also needs us to show certain things. And if we resist all of that, then he can't do that much. But I maintain that in spite of what science says, there are miracles. And miracles happen all the time. We see them in places like Lourdes, where people go for healing. God shows himself there. But we also have to realize that God is not a material entity. So we cannot see him the way we see things around us. If you go by the senses, by what you smell, what you hear, what you can see, you cannot discover God. God is not available through the senses, but he is available for what happens in this world. And we interpret that it's God's work that is going on. And science, as I said already at the beginning, cannot really live without those assumptions that there is order in this world, that this world is intelligible. So we have to assume that science cannot prove that. Science can prove a lot of things. I know. I will not say anything wrong about it. I'm a scientist myself, so I have very high esteem about science. But what it cannot prove is its own assumptions. Where do those assumptions come from? From God, that this world is intelligible, that this world has order, that the laws of nature were created by God, that there is design in nature. So there must be an intelligent designer. So if you close your eyes for that, I go back to what I said earlier, then you are just closing your mind through your will. You are not willing to see what you are supposed to see. That is why so many people don't see anything in this life anymore than just pagan things, what you can touch, what you can smell, and they go by all of that. Is that an answer to your difficult question? No.
Well, it certainly addresses it in a very deep way, and it is quite an interesting answer. But I will pick up on something you wrote in your book, which certainly made an impression. It's in the early part. Your words: "A thoroughly secularized world is a world without windows or skylights, a prison cell. All of this will ultimately lead us to the edge of an abyss, which is nihilism," which we spoke about at the very start, claiming that there is no law, no authority, no rationality, no morality, and no purpose to life. The only thing left is the rock-solid reality of food, money, sex, and material possessions, all of which will collapse for us when we die. Now, before you address that, you're not a killjoy. You're not denying people the fun and joys of life, going to the movies, having entertainment, sports, and all of those wonderful things. But your thoughts on that, just take us through it. It's an interesting quote from you.
Did I really say all of that in my book? Unbelievable. No, it's,
Well, I certainly didn't write it.
I back it completely. It was, I think, very, as you said already, it is not against anything that that people do and enjoy. God has given us this world and also everything to enjoy. He created paradise for us, and paradise was good until we demolished what we were given in paradise. So it is partly our doing, and you know we are in a way animals if you look at it with biological eyes, but we have so much more that God has given us. We were made in His image, and if we lose that, then we are indeed just glorified animals who eat and breed, bleed, and excrete like animals do. But fortunately, we have so much more. we have a soul, and a soul comes, as you said already, with rationality, it comes with morality, and that we have to believe, cultivate, otherwise we are lost. And so I see the good parts of life, we see it all around us, but there are also bad parts, and that is unfortunately part of the original sin. When I talked about all kind of atheism, I also mentioned the kind that most people do not consider as atheism, that's Satanism. That we are also guided by, not only by God, but also by Satan, who is a fallen angel, and we are enslaved to Satan. The best case that everyone agrees on is probably Adolf Hitler. He was obsessed by Satan.
Just repeat that again. Adolf Hitler was obsessed by Satan?
Yes, he was obsessed by Satan. He in his writings, he even glorifies Satan sometimes. And I don't have a regular quote on that, but in my book I explain how he and his people behind him, how they were completely impressed by Satan. He was even, and I don't have the right word right now. He was, like we have now the New Age. You can be enculturated in certain things. And Hitler was actually really enculturated to Satanism. So he was a pion, or whatever you want to call it, in Satan's hands. And that is a kind of atheism, because he did not acknowledge God, he acknowledged Satan over God. And Satan is a fallen angel. He is not a god. He is an anti-god, if you want to give him that name. So he really did his. I'm trying to think now of the man who I don't have his name right now, but he really introduced him to Satanism, and he was sworn in to atheism. And I cannot say that about all other kind of people, but a lot of them were really atheists in that sense. They were enforced by satanic people, and that's why they can do so much, because they get also the power of Satan. And Satan does have power. He's an angel, but a fallen angel. God has power, fortunately, much stronger than Satan, so we don't have to worry eventually. But in the meantime, we have to live with the fact that some people go with Satan instead of going with God.
Well, we won't get into a long discussion with Adolf Hitler, but we did speak about it in my last interview. So Hitler was into Satanism. What about his lieutenants? And the other thing to raise is that Hitler, by background, was Catholic, I understand, and many of his lieutenants and colonels and the high-ranking members of the Gestapo were Catholics or Christian, at least by culture and raising.
Yeah, some of them were Protestants, but there were also a few Catholics. Yes, that's right. But that doesn't mean they are still Catholics when they were acting. So they gave up their Catholicism, like we see happening around us so many times. People just give up on it. Some get back to it and become converts, but a lot of them give up on their Catholic faith, which is a very sad thing. Very sad thing. So they are listening not to God anymore, but to Satan. The one who started the SS, he was actually completely involved with how do I say that? Let's say with Hinduism. That's probably the best word to mention. He had a whole library on Hinduism. So he was definitely not a Catholic anymore.
Yeah, well, it would be just suffice it to say that a lot of that group we're into the New Age cults and paganism and rituals and experimentation, and into what would be known as relativism. In other words, anything sort of goes. There's a section in your book that's going to be dissected, read, and analyzed, and it talks about the role of suffering. And that is perhaps the greatest challenge for non-believers and atheists. Why is there so much suffering in the planet if there's a loving and merciful God?
If I had the real answer, I wouldn't be here anymore, I think. It is unbelievable how important that is. There is it's a real problem for people. Why is there evil? I'm not talking so much about natural evil, like hurricanes and that kind of things. Natural evils are usually a result of the laws of nature. So you can see the good parts of it, and sometimes they have bad parts. I just used a very simple example of gravity. Thanks to gravity, we don't fall off the earth. That's a good part, I think. But it also makes happen that something can hit me on my head when it falls down. So that's a good part. But so I go into natural evil a little bit, and I explain that, the good parts and the bad part. But the worst evil is moral evil in what we do. And that is, you mentioned Hitler already, and he is definitely a case of moral evil. Where does that come from? There I go again, paradise. In paradise, Satan lured us into moral evil, that we could self-make our moral lord. And unfortunately, there is not much we can do about that. We can only fight it by doing good, moral good. But moral evil is what others do to us, and unfortunately what we do to others all the time. So we have to find an explanation for that part. And I think that is not so difficult to do. But the other kinds, the natural evil, I use a chapter on Job in the Old Testament. And I think Job is a good example of what natural evil can do. He was hit by all kinds of natural evils. But I also mentioned that he was hit by his so-called friends, who actually did moral evil to him by saying that he did something wrong, that he had to change his life. So that was probably the worst evil that could hit him. So what he did at the end of his life, he asked God for an answer instead of his friends. And what did God say? I go a little bit in detail in that in my book, so I won't give that all away. But God says to him, "Where were you when I made the world? Where were you when I did this and I did that?" And I say in the book, he was not humiliating Job, but he was saying, "Do you realize what I did for you when I made this world? I made it good." But for the Old Testament, Satan is not as real as in the New Testament, but still, there was definitely already Satan in the Old Testament. So he was not putting Job down, but he gave him answers that say, "Think all I did for you, Job." And then Job says, "I talked too soon. I gave answers that I didn't really know. And I talked for you, but not in your name." And I think that is what I say to most people when they say, "Why is God doing this to me? Why do I have cancer? Why do I have this?" Try to see it in God's perspective, which is not easy.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's not easy. From chapter 7, How Evil is Suffering, your words, "When we cause moral evil, we damage God's creation. That is what happened in Auschwitz, in the Gulag archipelago in southern Sudan on ground zero, murder, genocide, and destruction. But
Right.
you also then finish up on a very positive, optimistic note, which is not surprising, considering you call the book "Fate That Makes You Think." You would like there to be a happy ending, as all good stories end on a happy note. God's prescription for happiness, and you have one section of it called "Why 10 Words." You may not want to give it away here. You may want people to pick up the book, but take us through it.
I will do it very briefly. I thought I started the book with atheism, so I think I had to finish it by showing the opposite of atheism, which is the 10 Commandments, the 10 words that God gave us. It has been claimed many times that those 10 words can be found basically in many cultures, not only in Catholicism or Judaism. It's all over the place. C.S. Lewis said there are 10 words basically for everyone. And when you look at them, they are very basic rules for human life. Of course, all under the heading of God. That's why the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God. Look at what I did for you. You shall have no other gods before me. For if you have other gods before me, then forget it. Then you are back to your animal existence. So we need more than those rules on itself. They are in a certain context, and the context is God. That's why you should not murder. That's why you should not commit adultery. That's why you should not steal. And I explain in that chapter what all of that means in that context. But that's for the reader to decide.
And the reader you had in mind, at least originally, were falling away Catholics, those who'd lost their Catholic faith, and maybe this is a way to draw them back. It seems to me it could have a universal appeal, your book.
Oh, I hope it does. I hope it makes people think, and think also in a way that they are willing to consider God as a reality, as a real presence. You can, again, as I always say, you can prove it with the proofs of God's existence, but you have to finally accept it. And I hope that people, after reading this book and thinking along the lines, that they say, yeah, I can see now that there is more to faith than just a leap of faith. If you just leap of faith, then it's a lost case. For then no one can believe it anymore. And then you can believe whatever you want. The most weird things. I consider extraterrestrial influences, I consider that a little weird. So I don't think that is a religion. But still, if people believe in it, I think that is a weird belief. So, and I can show with arguments that it's not realistic. And as I said at the beginning, Catholicism is faith and reason. If something is not reasonable, don't believe it. And all religions that are not reasonable, don't believe them. Sorry, that is a strong statement.
Well, you live in New Hampshire. It's a beautiful part of America, so I'm sure you're constantly inspired by everything around you and God's creation, and we look forward to more books. The latest one is Faith That Makes You Think. It's accessible, it's reading, it's lively, and it's, I suppose, anyone can pick it up. I thought initially when I saw the title, oh my gosh, my eyes would glaze over, but you got me. You got my attention, and I look forward to your next tome. Can you give us any information? People want to order this. The publisher is, do I pronounce this right? En route. Where can they get the book?
You can get the book at Amazon. I think that is the best thing to say.
Yeah.
Don't look for my name, for it's a horrible name.
Oh no, it's a wonderful. I think it's a Dutch name.
It's Dutch, yeah.
Because you are originally from Holland.
Yes, correct. But it's not a name that people will misspell in a different way. So I would just, when you are in Amazon, at Amazon, I would say Faith That Makes You Think. There is no other book that has that title, and you will get to it. I think that's the best thing to say. And if you want to do my name, okay, Verschuuren. Whew,
Jeez.
I don't
They
think
can't
anyone.
spell that. They can just blame me. That's it. I will take all the rap for this. Um, Dr. Gerard, thank you for being on my show. Take care.
Thank you, John, for your great interview. You have a good day.